All right. Ship chasing is back at our afternoon time. We're going to move forward here at this Thursday afternoon time slot. We got lots to catch up on. I believe last time the three of us were on air, it was a late Friday night show with Dink and Leone getting ready for the FFPC playoff challenge. So do a little recap on what's transpired in the playoffs, how our FFPC portfolio is looking, maybe if we got any other playoff best ball sweats and the like. It's good to be back with Pete, Gretch, and Pat. Let's do some ship chasing here. Pat Fryer-Helmuth.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita Handjob.
Fix your sight. Jamar. Alpha play chase. Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
It looks like we're finally at this point. You're right.
All right, fellas, it does feel like it's been a long time here. We've had a lot of football that has transpired since we were last on the airwaves. How we doing, Gretch and Pat?
Doing good. How you guys doing?
Good. Yeah, there's been a lot of football. We're last doing the playoff stuff. I was just thinking about it before we went live. It's crazy. Like, there's still a lot to come for the sweats for like underdog, where you're just trying to kind of advance each round. But at this point, we're through 2 rounds. You think of it as like there's 4 rounds. In the FFPC one, 10 of the 14 teams are finalized. The other 4 teams have played, and we kind of have an idea of what they're going to be as well. Like, the tournament's like 90% done. Overall.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, over on underdog and stuff, it's kind of, it's consolidated too, because there's like kind of these chalk teams that have advanced. Like there's specific constructions that have advanced. So like you're happy if you have like a Mahomes Saquon. Like I have a gauntlet that's Mahomes, Saquon, Kelsey, Worthy, Hollywood, but it's like in a pod with a better version of that. And then I know when I get to if I get to the final that I'm going to be like facing off against probably I'm probably blocked. There's probably a version of that team that also has Kareem Hunt instead of Hollywood, right? So it's like there's that team. There's also the Jayden Daniels version of stuff with maybe that has Saquon too, but then also has Chiefs. So it's going to be interesting. I think the Bills making the Super Bowl would really shake up the playoff best ball contest because there's very few Bills that have advanced. I also happen to have a live DK team that has Jayden Daniels and Bills, so this is me also selfishly hoping that the Bills get that team through. But yeah.
Because if you would have known the outcome and the scores of, say, like the Bills games and the fantasy points, you probably would have just drafted like Allen, Ty Johnson, and like Curtis Samuel. Like just like get through with those 2 and then just have Allen as like your only piece.
I don't even know that you draft Allen. I think you draft Daniels and Hurts, and you know what I mean? And you're like, because Allen hasn't scored enough points. I had some sick Allen teams, I thought, heading into last week. And I was like, as long as Allen does his part, I'm in. And I didn't get in.
Yeah. I'm similar to you. I have one team in the Gauntlet Finals. It's actually pretty good. It has 7 live players. But there's a similar construction to a lot of them, which is Mahomes. It's Mahomes and Daniels on both of them. And then I have Barkley. But the reason the team like worked out so well is because I had Ladd and J.K. Dobbins as a round 1 advancement. And then I had Likely last week as a one-off piece.
Nice.
And those 2 things like helped keep the other 7 players intact. But you really had to thread a crazy needle there.
Yeah.
I don't draft a lot of those, but that's what I've seen on. I mean, I obviously can't. I don't draft any of them other than with you guys a little bit. But that's what I've seen on Twitter is people being like, the ways to advance this year were to just have, like, basically not necessarily good builds. Like the lineups that are thought to be dead, where you're just taking random players from different teams that have advanced.
Well, you needed to have like a kind of a team that was not what I would say was like optimal, but wasn't a total garbage pile either, right? Because you need to have a lot of teams that are so the nut, like if you have Jayden Daniels with a bunch of Eagles, that's pretty sweet. because especially if you have like Bills or Chiefs on the other side, now you're feeling great.
You couldn't get the Eagles through because AJ Brown's done nothing. Devontae Smith has done nothing. Like,
well, that's why you need Daniels. You have to have Daniels and McLaurin. You had to basically you had to build like the Eagles had a bye with Commanders as your bye week team, and then you'd be, but you'd still like built a very structurally sound team with that one thing. Like, I'm going to draft the Eagles like they're not going to score any points because they have a bye. But then I'm going to like keep it ideological after that so that I have like a bunch of live Commanders, bunch of live Chiefs or Bills. You're right. And you probably have Ladd or some other advance rate piece on there too that's dead. But it's tough because you still need to have like, 6, 7, ideally more live pieces. But it's tricky.
Yeah. And we were talking about this on Swolecast, and Davis's line was, Kitchen said, did you learn anything? Because Davis didn't advance any teams, and Davis just said, what is there to learn? And partly it does, like with the randomness of how some of this breaks, it's like, I don't know what the actionable takeaways are. It's just a very cruel random game. Yeah,
I am starting to, let's see, I got this, the team I got through on DraftKings, maybe I can pull it up. Is I am excited about it. It's required. I mean, it has to be the right Super Bowl, but
yeah.
If I get the right Super Bowl, I'm very live.
So we should talk a little bit about our FFPC, obviously, because we went pretty hard at it, like usual. Gretch, do you want to kind of maybe set the table for people, kind of like what our overall portfolio look like, or what kind of our big stands look like heading into the first round?
Yeah, we had 80 teams in the $200 one, so pretty big. Went pretty hard at it, like you said. Definitely tried to balance our exposures and stuff relative to Pat's ownership projections, which came in really, really great. We haven't had time to talk through that, but your ownership projections were, I think, the best ever, right?
I think it was my best ever year, yeah.
Hats off to you on that. That was awesome. We had – I'm pulling up our leverage right now. Our biggest underweight position on – I guess this is –
Saquon, right?
Yeah, it ended up being here's the actual leverage. It ended up being Saquon Barkley. So we were like, look, we went down with Saquon in the regular season. We might as well go down in the postseason as well. Our third biggest was Ladd McConkey, who scored the most non-QB. Actually, I think the most raw points.
Remember how grossed out the chat was by the Ladd chalk? The Ladd chalk gross. The chat was barfing in the streets. We had people watching while they were outside walking the dog, just puking into the gutter, and he was the absolute nuts.
He was.
And then we all continued to puke when he had that 88-yard touchdown catch.
I think that broke Leone because the first game was going really well for our different positions, and that play, because we had like an overweight position on the Chargers D, for example.
Yeah.
And without that play, Ladd's score was fine, but not like you had to have it. And the Chargers D had a really strong game and a loss, and they were looking really likely to be the optimal D. And as soon as he had that play, it's like, well, now Houston's D, who had already had a defensive touchdown, might be optimal in a 2-gamer. And a lot of our like Chargers D stuff was like predicated on Nico, or we had an overweight position on Joe Mixon as well, because the market really didn't like the Texans to win. And we, it turns out, smartly played the Texans to win more than the market. Unfortunately, even though the Texans won, Ladd was so explosive with that late 80-plus yard touchdown, he had to be in, and the Texans saw fades in 2 games were viable. So it was almost like you wanted to be playing it the way that the field did, as if the Chargers won. So that one didn't break our way. All really because of that McConkey big play. That's why I say it kind of broke Leone in the first game. But like as we were tracking it through the whole weekend, everything else went really well for our positions.
We also had McConkey. McConkey wasn't like someone we played a lot of teams, so we had good McConkey teams as well.
56% field ownership. We were at 40%. We were 16 points underweight, but still had him on 40% of our teams. So it's not like we didn't have any McConkey, right? And so we had some really good McConkey teams. What is that? 40% of 80 teams is, I should be able to do that math, but it's 32, I think. I mean,
I think that sounds right.
a decent number of teams, obviously, that have McConkey. And we had some really good builds after the Saturday night game, the Sunday morning, and the Sunday afternoon was the Packers game. And we had a really big overweight position on Josh Jacobs. That was a very specific one that we thought, number one, the Packers had a chance to potentially upset. They didn't really play well enough to do that. But again, that we thought that the field would play it less than the market was telling us the odds were, because the market did kind of like the Packers in a way that was maybe a little bit overpriced. But, looking back on it, because they didn't look great. But Jacobs scored their only touchdown and was sort of the key piece in a loss there. And so we were pumped about that. Jacobs was a guy we knew we needed to get right. We locked him in as the clear Packers piece, but he wound up not even really mattering, in part because the chalk just absolutely smashed in this contest.
You could also get that piece with Pickens and stuff, right? You could go get another guy who was like solid in a loss. Those weren't like,
well, even Pickens wasn't super high owned. But in terms of actual ownership, so Jefferson and Nakua were the top two. We were talking about all this before Monday night, and Jefferson obviously ended up failing, and it did help us because we had a decent Hawkinson position. But Nakua winds up with a pretty good score. Saquon's the next guy he hits in this tournament. Kelsey's the next guy, clear chalk tight end hits in both games so far. He's hit big. McConkey was the next chalkiest player at 56% by the field. He obviously was massive. Derrick Henry's next because the field really played Josh Allen-Henry combinations like we talked about, and Henry had 190-something rushing yards and 2 touchdowns in the first round. And so he was it over Allen, and Allen threw touchdowns to Ty Johnson and Dawson Knox in the first round or whatever. And then he became the logical one. And he had Curtis 2 rushing TDs in the second round. So, I mean, the Allen teams are very live. Oddly enough, the Jayden Daniels teams are pretty live as well. Or not oddly enough, but the Allen or Jayden Daniels quarterback path is really going to be the answer. And Henry, who was really chalky, is going to be the Baltimore answer. And so anyway, the point was like the top scoring players across the board, including like Terry McLaurin, including Nico Collins, all of these dudes scored. So the Jacobs play was like, Daniels that we had, but
Daniels should be amazing as like a pivot, but he's not because the Bills don't score any points. So you still just want Allen, assuming they go to the Super Bowl. Daniels now has to like go to the Super Bowl and not face Allen to be the quarterback that you actually want, because you'd probably rather just have Terry instead of a Bill, right? The Bills don't, it's all spread out. So
McLaurin's big first round made it tough for Daniels. So there was a bunch of dudes, and I say a bunch, there was maybe like 15, I can't remember the exact number, that had 34% or higher ownership. So a third of the field or more. And then the rest of the players in the player pool were 25% or less. So there was this like real delineation where you're either in a third of the lineups or more, or a quarter or less. And if all the players in a third or more, basically all of them are going to be optimal or close to optimal for their team, except for the players that were, or the teams where there was multiple players. So like Gibbs and Amon-Ra. The one that ended up working out really poorly is the guy that I loved all week was Bucky Irving. And he still had like 16 points, scored a touchdown and all this stuff, but Evans was a little better, and Chase McLaughlin wound up being a really great kicker option. But the big thing that hurt us on Sunday night was that Tampa-Washington game. We had a really big fade position on McLaurin. We had the Bucky stuff, and we wanted a second game to potentially let those.
One of the ways this tournament works is even if you have a bunch of teams, you end up getting funneled because there's like, okay, you got a bunch of teams, but like you don't have like every single combo evenly distributed on each team. So what ends up happening is like, where are lad teams? Where are the lad teams that are paired with, Houston D or Nico, or, like the right fades on the other games that don't, where are the lad teams that don't have Jefferson? So you're all kind of funneled. I guess the Jefferson game was after, but you know what I mean? You're kind of looking for the right combos, and the combos that we were looking at that were pretty good, in fact, that were leading the contest. We had the number one team in the contest heading into the Tampa Bay game. So we were feeling good about that team. That was a straight up Washington fade, a hard fade,
which could have
hit. Had a bunch of other stuff. Yeah. That was all kind of Tampa Bay oriented.
And they probably should have lost. That was the other thing that broke all of us, because Baker fumbles an end around play to Jalen McMillan. This is what I was talking about this offseason about Jalen McMillan being unreliable. This shit is like he had these drops and shit. That's the shit that I was trying to tell you guys. The biggest moments, this dude is like not getting his hands up for a fucking handoff. Like I was watching that game and I was like, this is what I was trying to convey to people. Like, just like the lack of focus. Anyway,
the curse.
He
The
fucking
curse
fumbles that. They get a short field touchdown. They drive all the way down and they have a shot to score a TD to regain the lead and fumble another snap and then have to kick a tying field goal and turn the ball back over in a tie game with like 2 minutes left. Washington goes down, kicks a game winner. They win the game. 2 snap-related snafus in the last like 2 minutes. I mean, that was such a frustrating thing because to your point, we had a lot of these teams where we were fading Washington. McLaurin had a good game, but not like a must-have game necessarily.
Kind of a Jacobsy
Washington
type
loses
of
that.
Nice
Both the kickers in that game were doing well. If Washington loses that, we had a huge overweight position on Zane Gonzalez. He becomes a really nice kicker option that trades off with the McLaurin stuff. Because so many other chalk players hit, you didn't have to have McLaurin. You might actually have wanted their kicker, even though McLaurin
kicker kind of sucked
points.
too. The losing team kickers kind of sucked.
Right. All the
really
other
good
losing kickers were terrible. It was like blowouts all weekend. And so we're in this position where like, man, if Tampa pulls this out, we have some really nice teams that do have McConkey, but have Washington soft fades. And instead, because Washington won, it basically locked in you're going to wind up needing a Washington player. And then it flipped the Tampa side to the clear soft fade because McLaughlin had kicked a bunch of field goals. And we were underweight McLaughlin as it turned out because we had a lot of Evans. We had a lot of Bucky. Some of the Evans stuff worked. Some of the Bucky stuff was certainly not as good, but was on some of our better teams. And we're sitting there like, man, if Tampa would have pulled that game out, which is a fascinating sliding doors thing. We were talking about it with Dink the other day because Tampa would have played Philly and then the Rams would have Tampa would have played Philly. The Rams would have went to Detroit. And so where would we be at now? Because Washington goes to Detroit and wins, changes the whole postseason.
Yeah, it's wild. And the other thing too, you mentioned like the chalk. The one way you could tell it's pretty chalky is like there's a bunch of like dupes up at the top. If the bracket breaks in a slightly contrarian way, you're probably not seeing too many dupes at the top, but there's like a train here in 4th place. Our guy Toyo looks like he self-duped himself here. The 2 teams in 2nd are duped.
Toyo and duped, sponsored by Toyo.
I love how he named that team duped. Yeah.
That's so good.
But yeah, you can see that team in 1st. So much chalk here other than, Mixon and Jacobs. I guess what did Jacobs come in? Did he come in as chalk?
No, he was
not
right
really.
at the bottom of that. He was 34%. He was like that last one. I was talking about that cutoff of he's right at like a third of teams. So not like heavy chalk.
That counts as a pivot in this contest.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah, but other than that, looking at this, I mean, it's what? It's Chase McLaughlin, in Jacobs, in Mixon.
Rams defense is a big pivot.
Okay. Yeah, getting off of Puka, who was the 2nd highest
That's true.
Roster player, which is fascinating because they played 2 games, and so to have the Rams defense there and have Jefferson, that team's in 1st. I mean, that's what am I missing?
Because Rams defense just had so many sacks in both of those games.
They did. That's right. They
were
were like
kind of the nuts after that.
And Puka didn't really have a great game in either game. I guess I hadn't really thought through that, but he didn't have a great game in the first game. Kyron had more points in him the first game. The second game, because I played a little bit of the round 2 tournament with Sean, and in the second game, which just starts in the second round, he was behind Kyron for most of the game. At the end, he caught a couple passes, went ahead of Kyron. They both finished behind Higbee, who some people like pivoted to. And like some Higbee lineups have a shot to win that round 2 contest. But anyway, Puka and Jefferson were the 2 chalkiest players, wound up both being players you didn't necessarily have to have, which is the one, way that chalk didn't hit.
Right.
Yes. Bruce saying, was Texans D the defense you needed? No. So far it's looking like Rams. And as I clicked through some of these teams at the top, there were a lot of different Texans. There's some Mixon, there's a Nico, there's a Fairbairn. But what's technically optimal for Texans? Mixon?
I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I think there's a couple different combinations, first of all, because essentially there was no clear one and done soft fade options that were like really perfect. Like even that team you just clicked on is Chris Boswell. Right? What's that?
McLaughlin was Probably pretty
He was,
close.
but I don't think he was played heavy enough. Maybe as what it was, or maybe he was played a decent amount, but just not like so much.
He couldn't have played that much because of Bucky Evans chalk.
Right. Yeah, he was only played 4% by the field.
Yeah.
But like you just clicked on Boswell. Boswell was the chalkiest kicker. He had like 1 point or 2 points, but he's actually in some of these very best builds. He was in some of our best lineups where we played him a little bit. Just sort of by happenstance for us because we didn't have a big position on him. Actually, we did. We played him 19%, so that was part of why we had him in a decent amount of teams. But I think because and one of the things we'll have to think about next year, and I think as far as lessons learned, is we've always talked about the soft fades. You want to play them on one and done teams. Last year, the Texans were optimal in 2 games. This year, the Texans were looking close to optimal, but maybe aren't because the Rams might be in 2 games because their players didn't really hit. I'm starting to think that one of the like longer term lessons is we have to consider more of these soft fades in multiple game situations, which is annoying.
Which is annoying because that's how the field plays it.
Right.
So it's like we're probably going to the field a little bit more on that. And yeah, the hard fades on the teams that like you really, really want your hard fades to lose. So the teams that get over faded, you want them to win. Like the Packers, and it was frustrating because the Eagles do not look bulletproof at all, right? They kind of tried to give that Rams game away. The Packers go out and lose the opening kickoff to a fumble and everything, and then kind of just didn't have it in that game. But the Eagles did not look that great in that game. So in like a different universe, I could see the 7 seed winning in round 1, but ultimately, like, yeah, Jacobs didn't have a big enough game, and then you lose the ability to have hard faded one of the teams that was pretty likely to lose in round 1. So yeah, but Boswell kicker is probably worse than it. I mean, that was chalk too. I was wrong about that. I keep being wrong about the chalk kicker. It drives me nuts. I thought it was going to be Zane, and then it ended up being Boswell, which kind of makes sense. But I actually think, to your point, Ben, is probably not good. Like, if you're picking them to lose, you probably just hard fade them.
Right, but it's the classic. He feels comfy because he had such a good season. Pickens limps into the playoffs doing nothing. And even though you should just fade him, it feels good to have a kicker that you actually like. It was the one name brand kind of kicker.
Right.
That was viable.
So just to finish that, a couple of thoughts there. We went in the division round not in great position. The Vikings-Rams game did go our way. We did need some like crazy chalk to miss a little bit in that game. It did
big time. Yeah.
Hawkinson was a big piece, and he ended up the Vikings' top scoring player. So some of our Hawkinson teams were in really good shape going into the division round. The biggest thing Leone was talking about during the week was we needed A.J. Brown to come back and have a big game for the Eagles and be right for the Eagles. And Saquon went absolutely nuts against the Rams. So that was the nail in our coffin, was that Saquon game against the Rams in the division round.
Yeah.
We're pretty dusty at that point. But to Pat's point, we had the team that was number 1 unduped overall with a Washington fade if Tampa would have won that game. In addition to that, it wasn't just that team. We had another top 10 unduped team that had the Zane Gonzalez thing we were talking about, and it had either Evans or Bucky. And then we had, I want to say, 2 more in the top 100 that were reliant on this Tampa over Washington path. They were really pretty reliant on that. So we were going to have like 4 really nice combinations going forward if Tampa would have just closed out Washington in a game that they fucking should have won. Like they absolutely should have won.
Yeah, that was frustrating.
So I saw a couple people were asking about our Jayden Daniels teams, because we do have some Jayden Daniels. What percentage was he rostered, and what did we play him at?
Daniels was, I mean, we had him in, I want to say like 8-ish lineups, maybe 6. Okay, 6. Let me find him. He was in 3% of the field. We played him 9%. We had 7. It was right between what me and Pat said. The tricky thing on that is we all really like the Daniel stuff. And when we started to do our builds, we were like, okay, we'll start with some of the the non-chalky quarterbacks. Let's knock some of those teams out. And we built the Daniels teams first. And I remember this because on Saturday, when we were going back through our whole portfolio, trying to line things up and figure out some of the combinatorial stuff. And it's a whole process when you do a lot of teams in this, because they're all uncorrelated builds, right? And so you do, as Pat was saying, you do wind up on these certain paths where you're because of certain things happening, all your good lad teams have this. And you still want to have your lad team spread out on the Bucky versus Mike Evans point, right? You don't want to have everything be completely lined a certain way. So we're trying to do that as best as we could. And we were talking about Daniels, and I remember him being I don't really want to touch the Daniels teams. We spent the most time on that because they were the first teams we did, and we really did spend a ton of time on it, and not because we always start really inefficiently when we start our builds on Friday night after the show. But after the contest had started and we're looking at it, we're seeing Daniels could be good. I kept looking at those teams, and I'm man, these are they're not our best builds. It's we kind of, as we started building more, we kind of found the things that we liked, and we had some really fun builds, I think, with other quarterbacks. This is just my perception of it, but because we started with the Daniels builds, I feel they're overly leveraged and wonky and weird, not our best possible set of 7 Daniels teams. And
we played I think as a whole, the issue with our Daniels teams was that we played Daniels as a 2-game play. We never played Daniels to beat the Lions. Is what happened, right?
Right.
So it was all well, we got to make sure we got Cortland Sutton in there. We got to get George Pickens in there.
We would soft fade Buffalo so that Allen wasn't even in the tournament.
Yeah, and then maybe let's fade Butker so we don't even have a Chief. And it's what if, and I know this seems crazy, but what if the Commanders win 2 games? Why we didn't really build lineups like that, which is another path. The obvious path was Daniels is optimal in 2 because Allen blows it and Lamar doesn't, and it's Henry, and then but they lose to the Chiefs or whatever. But we could have just done the simplest, the path of least resistance. Really, is just the Commander's surprise, and in 3 games, Daniels is optimal.
If it's not Josh Allen, if it is Daniels, the Bills. What is it going to be? James Cook? Who's it going to be? Do you guys think?
Probably Cook.
Probably.
So I'm looking at our teams. Of our 7 teams, it looks like we had 2 Cooks. Because to Pat's point, we did Bass. We did a hard Buffalo fade. We have 2 Shakirs. We have a Daniels Kincaid team, it looks like, as well. So we were doing these weird one and done potential scenarios or fluky 2 gamers for Buffalo. Because you're inherently fading Allen, and to your point, you're we're thinking, oh well, it's probably a 2-gamer for Daniels, so we need Allen to not be right, and so we need some weird things to happen for Buffalo, and we did other weird stuff. We have some KC DST on 3 of these Daniels teams, it looks like, and so there's just
There's too much weird stuff.
I'm bummed about that because we did like the Daniels position, but you build 80 teams and you're 3 times the field's weight, and yet this is a 12-man lineup, and you just don't have a good combination for what actually happened.
Yeah,
it's a dynamic that you were just describing that kind of plays out in Best Ball Mania drafting, right? Where say you go hard at someone this is actually a really good example. I was drafting a shit ton of Marvin Mims at the beginning of the season. And then I'm all right, this isn't looking good. I need to back off of this exposure. Sean Payton's going to Sean Payton. Then at the end of the year, I'm building my information heavy teams. I'm getting my Jordan Masons on there. I'm building these really good teams. And I'm done taking Marvin Mims, who ends up being a really fucking nice piece to have in the playoffs. But I'm already done with it from an exposure standpoint. And it's how do you break out of these takes I have? I want to sprinkle them out throughout your whole portfolio. It's hard to do.
Yeah, but the funny thing about what I just said of why didn't we build Jayden Daniels just to beat the Lions? I bet you we don't end up with Gibbs on those teams.
Right.
And you want Gibbs bad. So it's Daniels. How do you get to Daniels Gibbs without some goofy, Tyler Bass, Cortland Sutton pivot? It was kind of tricky. We always talk about building a bracket and then playing that bracket. And it was Daniels was a tough one to really see. Okay, the Lions are going to score they're going to run the ball really effectively with Gibbs, and he's going to go nuts, but then they're going to lose at home. Okay, what are they going to give up 45 points to the rookie quarterback? Give me a break.
And even setting aside the Buffalo stuff, as you were talking through, like how bad you want Gibbs, we have 7 Daniels teams. Again, I just mentioned that's 3 times the field. Because of the way that this tournament just works out as you build stuff, we have 3 Gibbs teams, 3 Amon-Ra teams. I'm missing. Maybe we have a Laporta team in here. And then we had 4 McConkey teams with Daniels as well, which is like 4 out of 7. We were actually underweight the field at 40%. So we actually got a nice little build. Or no, sorry, it's only 3. So now I'm lying. Anyway, 3 out of 7, closer to our actual percentage. The 3 McConkey teams, 3 Gibbs teams. We landed with 2 that have both McConkey and Gibbs, who both wound up being like these awesome one-off pieces on Daniels teams. But like one is a KC DST team. Yeah. The other one was our best Daniels team, but it ended up with Bucky and AJ Brown. That's the one where we needed AJ Brown, or we needed Tampa to win and get Bucky.
And that's the thing where a guy like Jacobs or Pickens or Sutton not going like nuclear in a loss, really, or like Hawkinson, like someone, it would have been, if you're doing the Daniels thing, right, and you're doing like, okay, let's play it. We're going to be a little too cute, and we're going to bet. We're going to take Tyler Bass. We're going to take, Justin Tucker, right? Ravens D. That didn't work, but there's, in this contest, you can sometimes be saved by like getting Ferguson, and there was no Ferguson. This year didn't have a Ferguson, didn't really have anything close. So that's another thing that kind of broke against us. So we kind of sprinkle around looking for Ferguson types. There wasn't one.
Yeah, and I think, it's always going to look silly when the chalk smashes. But the amount of lineups you have to compete against when one of those underdog or contrarian plays does land in the optimal, it's like, holy shit, there's 6 other teams that are even live to compete against for this. And so I do think the lesson there is still like, I want to press those spots because it won't always go. So Chalky, you just look like an idiot when it does go super chalky because you're like, well, why wouldn't you have Jahmyr Gibbs on this team?
Yeah, this is why we do 80 teams in this contest too, because like we do want to press those spots. And some of the player that we played the absolute that we played at all that was in the fewest number of teams, I believe was one of the Packers receivers, because Leone was insisting that we do a little bit of Jayden Reed, but then also a little bit of Dobbs and Wicks. And I think Wicks was only in like 40 teams. I think Dobbs only in like 50 or maybe even less.
It was small.
But like one of the things that happens is in these 12-man teams, like, okay, well, you're really, we only put these guys into like one team, which, and I think it was sharp to your point and to what Leone was arguing, I think was frankly sharp. If those guys in a loss outscored Jacobs, which is not hard to see, all they had to do was be the guy who scored the touchdown at the end of the game. They scored 1 TD in the fourth quarter. If instead of Jacobs, it was Wicks catching that, then he's like a really nice piece in this contest, especially if the chalk didn't hit as much as it did this year. We talked about how,
frankly, been Kraft, because remember we were thinking Kraft would have done the tush push instead of Jacobs. He got tackled right at the 1, and we all thought Kraft was probably live to get that tush push.
That's right.
Kind of a goofy way for the tight end to get in, but like easily could have been Kraft.
Yeah, and I mean the my whole thing though is like when you build 80 teams, you build a couple of those guys in. Even when they hit in this contest, like part of the reason we're building 8 teams, because even when they hit in this contest, it's like, well, was that a Daniels team? Was that an Allen team? Was it a Lamar team? Maybe. Like, and then suddenly you're like, well, Lamar was not right at all. You have to get the core pieces right, you know, and there's just so many different ways that this build can go. I'm looking at our best Daniels team that has Gibbs and McConkey. It's a KC DST fade, which I think is the biggest issue, and it had Sutton on it. But it has Henry, it has James Cook, it has Mike Evans, it had Hawkinson. In addition to Nakua, it has Saquon on it. Like,
it does have Saquon?
No, we did play Saquon on some of these teams. Ooh. I guess just because it has Casey's DST instead of Kelsey, like because Kelsey wound up being pretty important. He's really chalky and he scored a ton of points.
What place is that team in?
I don't know. It's our team 4. It's numbered.
Because you also think about like from a leverage standpoint, like how do you keep Josh Allen? KC defense has a couple, scores. Then all of a sudden it's like Jayden's optimal. KC DST can maybe approach Kelsey a little bit, and then you wipe out the Bills too. Who is our Bill on that team?
The Bill on that one is.
Well, if you wipe out the Bills, then you get KC DST in the Super Bowl. And you need to pick. You need Jayden Daniels to get the Super Bowl, then melt down.
I mean, if we're just talking real football, I mean, KCDST is the best player on the Chiefs after Kelsey. I mean, so I don't mind that.
I don't have a counter.
Kelsey has just scored so many points. I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I've pulled this up. It's in 201st, but maybe it's still alive. I mean, it's got Daniels, Saquon, Cook, and Casey's D. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
There we go. Fire me up, Mike. KCDST is the ultimate leverage. 2 pick sixes. Who says no?
Who says no?
It's it's in
no,
200th, but it's only 33 behind first. I mean, I say only, but like you're matching a lot of the players. So you need to gain 33. Like Casey's D has to gain 33 on Kelsey. Something like that has to happen.
Well, we would be a Daniels.
You need Daniels going nuke in the Super Bowl.
Daniels Cook? James Cook?
Right.
Is that our...
That's what we would be.
That's probably what we want. Yeah.
There's got to be better Daniels teams out there that have Kelsey.
I'm trying to think
that's Kelsey with the DST.
I'm trying to think the story where James Cook goes nuts and the KC DST also has 2 defensive scores.
Right. This is a team where we were talking about the Chargers win thing. The reason we weren't talking about this team more, and Leone probably wasn't talking about it more, is this a team where we did McConkey, Kaimi, Fairbairn. We were doing what the field kind of did. As we talked about, even though we were heavier the other way in this game, we were playing the Chargers to win. We were playing the Texans to get eliminated and soft faded them. And then when the Texans win, you actually wind up with Fairbairn, your kicker, versus your DST in the second round. And you're like, well, this isn't great. One of these teams is going to advance. And yeah, now you got
that's where next year, if we do that stuff with Daniels, I think we should use it to play both sides of the game or play a cheat. Let's make sure that doesn't happen. I don't want to get Daniels right and then have Houston kicker versus KC DST. That's why were we that specific? It's annoying.
I actually love that point. What we did with a lot of these Daniels teams is we said, because he might need a 2-gamer, we need to shoot out in the first round. And so we do want to play both sides of Washington, Tampa. I mentioned a little bit ago, our other team had Bucky, and I was like, we might need Tampa to win. And then I realized, well, we didn't want Tampa to win because it's a Daniels team. We played one Daniels with Bucky. Most of our Daniels was with Evans, which is nice because Evans did outscore Bucky. But we were saying shootout. You want the Tampa guy in the loss.
We should have said we want, but we need the teams are dead if Daniels loses round 1. So that was actually we should have. The hindsight helps a lot here, but you could have. Okay, it's a shootout, but we have to have the Bucks lose. They have to lose. What's the good play there? The kicker. Right. Play the kicker.
It is. It's hard though. It is so much easier to do it when there's all right, we're just gonna analyze this one thing that didn't go our way. Yeah. Now imagine doing this without the benefit of what happened and being we're gonna go through every single situation with that level of specificity.
It's tricky because we did have one Daniels Chase McLaughlin, and I don't think we played a Daniels Tampa DST, but we did a Daniels with a full Tampa fade. So 2 of our 7 Daniels teams, we did play that way as well, where we were like, look, we're not playing a bring back necessarily. We just liked the bring back on 5 of our 7. Our Daniels McLaughlin happens to be our Buffalo full fade with Cortland Sutton on the team.
Yeah. And Bruce is saying maybe the play is whoever your quarterback is, you always choose the opposing kicker or DST. I think generally you just want a hard fade with your opposing quarterback because most of the time your opposing the quarterback will be Allen, he'll be Lamar. Those are huge chalk pieces, and so you're dead. I mean, you're dead if they don't win round 1. So pick them to win round 1, and you don't even need it to be a shootout because you're saying you're probably dead if they don't make the Super Bowl, or at least go 3 games. Maybe Allen in 2 could be optimal if he goes nuclear, but that's probably more round 2 than round 1. You're betting on that, in a loss. So when I'm thinking about Daniels, it's not because of the quarterback thing. It's because he was a contrarian quarterback that I'm saying could be optimal in 2 because he goes nuclear in both games. So that's a more specific bet where you're going, okay, then I probably we played it as we were all aligned on this. Let's get more Mike Evans in there. Let's get more Bucky in there. This is going to be a good game environment. Those 2 guys are going to score well. They both did, but ultimately you'd just rather have faded them and taken the kicker.
Another thing I'm realizing we did a lot of, and we did on this one that we had McLaughlin, is we use that extra flex piece not to play both sides of the AFC team, like you were saying. but to play Josh Jacobs onto this team, because if Green Bay upset Philly, it helped Daniels' path.
I still like that. I still like that.
If Green Bay and Washington both would have won in the first round, Green Bay goes to Detroit.
But you know what's so funny is
to LA.
They beat Detroit. They went to Detroit.
I know. They
go
and beat Detroit.
Detroit.
You're like, this is the best way to help Daniels, get him going away from Detroit, and then he just goes into Detroit and fucking beats them. I mean, that's the other part of it. There's the whole, what if Jayden Daniels is just him element of every contest, you know? Any best ball contest, anything you're building, you're like, well, what if this is just the breakout moment for this player, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is hard to know like what are actual lessons. Like in the way we do it, like we do jot down some notes each year of like process tweaks we want to make, but you also don't want to like overfit it to a specific set of outcomes and then get away from, like we were saying, like you still want to pull those levers. You still want to press some spots that you think the field is overconfident in. What do you guys have any macro takeaways? I know obviously the slate's not settled, but kind of just talking through some of the stuff that you want to do differently.
I think Pat was just doing a really good job of talking through what's sort of a second order effect of what we were already talking through, which is not to think about your kicker and DST as like needing to be like soft fades. I guess because there's just so many combinations, even in a year like this where all the chalk hit, we're seeing Boswell up near the top, you know, like you don't have to be perfect. And so like Pat was saying, well, you want your quarterback to win the first game for sure. You might as well just hard fade the opponent and give yourself some other outs. Like we've always talked about picking a bracket and not necessarily worrying too much about optionality. I guess I'm going to be a lot more open to optionality, even with the soft fades and how the bracket can play out, and thinking more about, I guess, the teams, right? Like who makes sense for the Bills. It's mostly Allen, even in 2-gamers. Like, Allen can be the dude. Then I want to play him without really worrying about how far I'm picking the Bills, and that kind of a thing. It's tricky, but yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things for me that's this is a thing I kind of already thought, but I think one of the things that this year again kind of underlines is like in the playoffs, unless you're betting on a team to lose, it's really nice to have the engine of the offense. And this is, I think, where you're seeing the chalk hit so hard this year is because, like, in a way that's not going to happen quite this much every year, but in a way that I do think is part of the way the playoffs work. Like when the Eagles win, it's because Saquon Barkley had a good game because their whole offense is built around Saquon Barkley right now. That's why I like the Jacobs piece so much, is that like their offense was Josh Jacobs to close the season. Right. And so if they win, you're going to have Jacobs. Like Jacobs is going to be the guy because they beat the Eagles. So he had a good game, and now you're getting them in a second game, and they're going to build it around Jacobs again, and you're going to feel really good about having him. But even in a loss, he was fine. But the funny thing about the way these things work is, who's next year's Josh Jacobs? Like, there probably isn't one. Like you almost got to like look ahead. Like next year, we should be looking for who's the Aaron Jones, or who's the Ferguson. Like go back a couple years, because Jacobs was kind of Cam Akers from years ago, but the Cam Akers worked better because Cam Akers and the Rams beat the Seahawks in that game. And obviously we didn't get it with the Packers, but yeah, I kind of like, I'm filing away like types of plays from each year. And it's sort of like you're reviewing, like, do we have an Akers again? Do we have a Ferguson again? That kind of thing. One thing I think I want to do more of, to the Ferguson point, is take 2 years in a row. We've said, who we're not fading? The uber mega chalk receiver, because he's just too good. He's too locked in. CeeDee Lamb, gotta play him. Puka, gotta play him. And I think that's a leak. Like, let's have more courage and fade the biggest chalk on the board. And then obviously that's going to kill us next year. But like,
I know we did that in 2021 with Cup, and it wasn't great when they went all the way to the Super Bowl and you had to have Cup.
You had to have Cup.
But I think Jefferson was also that
Jefferson we did
year when the Giants beat the Vikings. I think it's been 3 of the last few years where there's been a chalk. I think he was a miss. That's a chalky.
He was a miss. Yeah, you didn't want. I think you wanted Hawk. So like that's, I think, one of the bigger edges is like 85% of the field is going to play this guy. And if they lose, like that's probably bad because you could soft fading. Because I mean, we're probably not catching Ferguson, but what if we had Dallas kicker last year, on more instead of more CDs? So taking the guy who's like 85, so locked in at receiver, which we know, can fail any week, and soft fading that team.
Yeah, Hawk had 10 catches in that Giants game. So to your point, it's been, I think, 3 years in a row. It was that Jefferson loss, Vikings lost to the Giants, then Lamb last year, and then both Jefferson and Puka, really, because the Rams D winds up. That's a pretty good play.
Yeah, and I think my takeaway, just knowing how much we were relying on the Bucs to win, because looking at that spot, I think it's the spot we would say the field is being too overconfident, right? Like we kind of fell for that same trap of like not building out more soft fades of the Bucs, knowing that would be underutilized by the field. Like we basically were in line with the field, right, on our Bucky and Evans ownership.
Yeah.
And thinking through that overconfidence there is probably like a good takeaway of like, in the same way, like I was okay, like fading Jefferson. I'm like, you guys are all piling in on this. Like, I don't necessarily love that spot, but it was like, it is really hard to do it when it's like two plays with like everything you love. But I do think maybe a humility in that spot would be prudent.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a good point.
Bucky and Irving, we were 6% overweight Bucky, 4% overweight Evans. We underweighted sort of the other stuff to offset that. But we played a lot. 96% of our teams had either Bucky or Evans. We didn't play McLaughlin like at all.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was a mistake.
Yeah. How did Montgomery do, Pete? I don't know what this is in reference to. Montgomery didn't get played at all in this contest, right?
No, and I don't think he was somebody we ever really talked about either, because of Gibbs and Amon-Ra. So,
and if you did play him, that team is dead. Toyo chiming in the chat because someone mentioned he did the dupe thing in the $35 contest too. He says it was a clerical error, export error, in which I intended to input a lever, and he's not doing okay about it. Well, if those teams finish first and second, you'll be doing plenty fine with it there. It happens. Casey says, Leone dunking on us with the olds. We maybe shouldn't dismiss them as much. That's an evergreen comment there. Any other, maybe zooming out from the contest specifics, any other either things that have really surprised you in the playoffs or things that have delighted you? We haven't really gotten to talk about these games outside of this fantasy lens.
I mean, Jayden Daniels is going to be a future MVP. This dude is the best player to enter the NFL in a long time.
It's been a
I've been working on the rankings for the big board.
Oh, really? You're already in that lab?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty deep in the lab because it's big board will be out pretty soon, I think. So we gotta get things sorted. Daniels, we have ahead of Hurts, quarterback 3. I mean,
I'm just kidding.
Maybe, but I think he'll go ahead. I don't think that'll be a stand. I think he'll go ahead.
That's where he's gonna go.
What do you have it as? Allen
and Lamar.
Allen, Lamar, Hurts, Allen, Lamar, Daniels, Hurts.
Yeah,
he's in that group for sure.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think there'll be some debate.
There will be people that want Daniels to be the QB1, I think.
Right.
I don't know if he necessarily should be. The size stuff is still important. He did get banged up this year and couldn't throw downfield for a good chunk of the season as a result of that. I mean, Allen and Lamar have done it for a long time and scored at a really high level.
I think it should still be Allen and Lamar. You could debate the order of those. We have them back to back.
I also the other thing that could actually boost him is if they invest in a wide receiver in free agency or the draft. If they get a name that gets people excited, and then you're like, holy shit. And he just got an extra weapon, and De'Ami Brown isn't his wide receiver too. That could be fun.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I guess I didn't really think about this, but I thought Kingsbury would be gone, but with Ben Johnson landing in Chicago, I haven't really heard a lot of buzz. Kingsbury, there was a little bit of buzz about Kingsbury.
Jacksonville mix, I don't think.
Yeah. And we're left with just a couple spots available now. So I don't know.
It'd be nuts to go to the Raiders.
Yeah, I don't think he might be back. And that would be, I think, a pretty big positive for Daniels. I think the offense was cleverly designed for Daniels' strengths. But I mean, Daniels is just – I wrote a whole piece over at the newsletter for anyone who cares about some longer thoughts about it. But I got asked by my subtitle was a question from an IRL buddy sparks a random long post because I got asked from one of my good buddies. We talk sports all the time, like basically just how was he so good? And I went into just this long take about him. But I mean, you just don't have a dude this athletic with this much arm talent and accuracy, and the throw to De'Ami Brown that they kept showing in that game where it's under pressure. I mean, when you're off platform, you're under pressure, stepping into a hit, being able to hit those throws downfield. That's what the best pocket passers were able to do. Peyton Manning and Tom Brady for their whole careers. Daniels is doing that shit as a rookie, and he's a hyper-mobile quarterback. Once you have all of those things and the ways that defenses have to play you, they got to put more guys in the box. That's part of the reason why all Lamar's receivers have these great separation stats, et cetera, et cetera. Once Lamar developed, and especially the Todd Monken offense came around and developed he's always been a good passer, better than people give him credit for, but the really elite passing stuff, their offense looked unstoppable too, because you have to count for him in the running game with extra guys in the box. Allen, same thing. Once he developed as a passer, took him a few years, but you get that mobility with that type of touch downfield and consistency. But Daniels, I think, is even more of a consistent downfield passer than I think Allen and probably Lamar. I mean, he's not as good of a runner as those guys.
He's not as good as a runner as Lamar.
No, but he's so good as a passer for a dude that's as mobile as him. It's it's a really hard thing to scheme for. That's what my whole piece was about. Anybody wants to read it, but it's as far as how defenses are going to play him, that's why he's so good. You can't do anything about it. You can't just leave. That's why Brian Robinson had a great year running the ball, right? And their RPO offense was really good. And we had Zacchaeus and Zach Ertz popping up on good games. You can't account for everything. Where are you going to put your numbers on defense, right? You can't take away everything. So anyway, he's the biggest storyline of the postseason for me. And really fun dude for the future.
Matt wants to know where you have Terry McLaurin in early ranks.
Let's see.
Because that's a fun one. He was early 5th round pick, I think, is where he closed this year.
We don't have him super high because hang on, I got this sorted by filter to quarterbacks. McLaurin, we have it 35 or 30, roughly in that range.
Late 3rd round.
Because I don't know what ADP will be yet. FFPC actually has some ADP. Looks like McLaurin.
Yeah, because FFPC launched their never too early best ball contest.
He's got an ADP of 34 over there, so we're kind of in line with that. The concern with McLaurin, I would say, is that they're pretty live to add somebody. The other thing is, you talk about Daniels, what are you kind of looking for him to improve on at this point? And it's just do it at higher volume. This is what we want. No notes, just more, and
keep on, brother.
So that's pretty appealing if you're a receiver, right? You're there's openings. I can replace Olamide Zacchaeus or, whoever else. And I can, or run out of the slot. Zach Ertz is a free agent. He'll probably come back. But there's plenty of targets available in this offense for a talented receiver. You could see a Chris Godwin wanting to go there. You could see T. Higgins wanting to go there if he doesn't return to Cincinnati. Devontae Adams is essentially a free agent, and it looks like Rodgers is going to retire. So he could end up. He's got a chance to play with a fun young quarterback / maybe ring chase at this point. They're not in the ring chasing conversation. They're about to play in the NFC Championship game. So I think with McLaurin, if it's this setup again, he's a steal at 34, but it might not be this setup again.
Yeah. And he only had basically in line with his career numbers in terms of targets per out run. He's always been really efficient. He had a high ADOT. He had a strong weighted targets per out run, but it was about 21% targets per out run. 1.98 yards per out run is good. It's really good. Being around 2. Yeah. I mean, this is what PFF numbers is solid. It's one of his better seasons of his career. it's not like, and this has been the whole thing with Terry McLaurin his whole career. Some people want him to be really, really good, and he is really, really good. And then now this year, I think a lot of the talk was like, well, he's just never had a quarterback, and now he finally has a quarterback. No, he's never been an elite receiver. He's never earned targets the way elite receivers do, even with bad quarterbacks. He's always been a very, very good, but not elite, like great, but not elite receiver. So you start talking about third round, and you're starting to talk about added competition. That would be a concern for me. I think he'd be still very good, but at third round, I want a guy who can finish top 5, for a wide receiver pick.
Yeah, I agree. We're probably a little bit behind market to start. And just baking in some of the downside. But look, I mean, if they do bring in somebody and then he ends up being like a 5th round pick or 6th round pick, like I think I'm pretty into that because he can obviously have good spike weeks or
right
to a really strong quarterback. But like just to compare him to Nico Collins, who would, be kind of the breakout receiver of 2023's really strong rookie quarterback season. He had 3.11 yards per route run, which is absolutely insane. And then this year he was at 2.86, even with the offense taking a step back, far more efficient than McLaurin. So that's like McLaurin just didn't have anywhere near that. Like, okay, you're now an elite receiver. Now, granted, if he did, he'd be going in the 2nd round, not the 3rd. But yeah, there's just like he's a little fragile, and the ceiling, like, what's different next year? Why would its ceiling unlock next year that wasn't available?
And people are going to double count that because they think that he now finally has a QB, and so now he is the Nico Collins. But probably this was like his best moment. He's going to be another year older as well. He's not a young receiver. He's like 29, right? He didn't come in super young.
He's at least 29, I think.
Yeah, he turns 30 in September. So, yeah, he's going into his 7th season. He started as a 24-year-old. He was an older – like you would think at 29, this would have been one of his best years without much competition. And it was a really good year, but
good year.
People talk about it like it was a top 5 overall year. And that was the thing. To your point, Nico, back-to-back years are 2.8 or higher yards per out run. I was just saying McLaurin is about 2.0, right? Like that was the thing I was talked about with AJ Brown. Started his career with 2.5 plus every year. He's probably, continuing.
What would Terry's be at if he played alongside Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell?
Right.
For the year.
AJ Brown has been 2.5 or higher yards per out run every year of his career. Jamar Chase, every year. You know about like the very best wide receivers, they're at 2.5. They're at 3 yards per out run. To Pat's point about Nico, like 1.98 is very good. He is very good, but just pump the brakes a little kind of thing.
One more of these. Where's JSN at?
JSN
late 2nd, early 3rd.
Yeah, 30. And let me see. He's got an ADP of 30 on FFPC. On FFPC, we have him at 33 right now because more tight ends jump him.
Yeah.
So basically, like, kind of the same thing. I think my take on JSN is like, you got a new offensive coordinator, which for him isn't great since he became the number 1 down the stretch. You kind of prefer the status quo. I'm not sure Geno's locked in. And to me, I'm like, Geno's like the best case scenario, but they don't seem completely sold on Geno. So that worries me a little bit. So it's less about them adding somebody than about like, what's a team that could bottom out next year? And I think Seattle's fairly high on that list. Especially who's their OC?
Yeah. 181 yards per out run. Got by a little bit on routes this year. 625 routes is a huge number. I think he was like 5th in the NFL in routes. Not so much great on a per route basis. I mean, I think you can make the case that he's going to be overdrafted next year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we'll have like a big fade position, but like 2 or 3 picks behind ADP most likely to start. Obviously, I don't know what underdog ADP is going to be, but yeah, I mean, in the 3rd round, I think he's fine.
Yeah, the argument for him is like he was a young rookie. He had a really strong 2nd season, and we don't necessarily know what his ceiling is. He's still only 22. He turns 23. It looks like in a couple weeks. He could be an even bigger year 3 breakout. Like we just talked about Nico Collins. His big breakout was year 3. Similar to this, actually, in these yards per out run ranges in year 1 to year 2, and then year 3 is when he really took off. JSN's not Nico necessarily, but it's with Terry, I'm talking about a guy we've seen 6 years on, and he's never been higher than 2.05 yards per out run. And you're like, okay, at 30, what's going to happen? You're like, how is he going to become even better?
Right.
It's funny to think that JSN and DK Metcalf could just do like an exact flip in ADP spots from
I think that's
last
kind of what's going to happen. Although Metcalf will be higher than JSN was, and JSN will be probably right where DK was, though. So they'll both be a little higher. But
where do you think Metcalf's going to come in?
Probably in the 50s.
So that would be slightly higher than JSN.
A little higher than JSN.
Yeah.
JSN was at times in like the 8th round last year, but you're thinking more like 5th round.
I'm thinking 5th round. One guy I think will be pretty high on compared to the market, at least where FFPC is right now, is Marvin Harrison. I think he should go in the 3rd round.
People you're saying overreacting too much.
Interesting.
Yeah, because like this dude was one of the best wide receiver prospects ever. He, I think, was at like 1.6 something yards per route run ultimately, which is not great, but it's not like a huge red flag. Lots of really good receivers kind of start there. Trey McBride is the number 1 there, but he's got solid quarterback play and very little target competition outside of the tight end. And so I think you could see him taking more and also just like being better and lifting the ceiling of the passing game down the stretch next season. At the 3rd round price, man, it's just like from the pedigree and like a pretty good situation, and it's not like he had a disastrous rookie year. Now, I mean, we just got JSN in the 8th coming off a disappointing rookie year, and you'd probably prefer to get more of a discount than we're going to get on Harrison. But I don't know. I think Harrison in the 3rd is going to be pretty good.
He's a really good example of betting into uncertainty and some of those things, which is similar to what we did with JSN last year. Rowan a minute ago said that like Terry's no Nico, 3rd feels solid for that profile. I don't think the top 5 upside really exists in round 3. And I kind of earmarked that in the back of my mind because I was like, I mean, I don't think I could disagree with you more, buddy, because that's like where Cooper Kupp went, and he had the greatest season of all time a few years back. There's other examples.
He was 4th, I think.
He was like 4th, 3-4 turn.
Diggs was 5th in his breakout season with Allen. Yeah.
It's happened a ton. It just maybe hasn't happened in the last like 1 or 2 seasons, but I bring that up because you said Harrison in round 3, and it reminded me of that comment because what you're describing is like this guy was a legendary receiver prospect. What if he does have the huge year 2 takeoff season? Are we really going to say Marvin Harrison can't be a top 5 wide receiver? We're drafting him in the 1st round as a rookie. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like there's obviously paths, and you're talking about round 3 feeling high on him. You push him down to round 4 or round 5. I mean, maybe feeling a little high. You push him down to round 4, round 5. Like you're still talking about Marvin Harrison definitely has top 5 ceiling. Like those guys. Malik Neighbors like last year was a round 3 pick, and for a while in this year as a rookie was looking like he was going to be a top 5 rookie, overall player, and then have I mean, young players can do it from round 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Harrison's been drafted. It looks like 4 times on FFPC. Looking at Fantasy Mojo stuff.
4 times? That's our sample size right now.
There's only 6 drafts that have been started. So yeah, 4 of the 6 drafts he's been drafted. But he looks like he's got an ADP of 39. So early 4th round. But maybe even a little later because I'm not sure how far along that 5th draft is.
Where does Brian Thomas come in?
Oh, I think Brian Thomas is going to be like 1-2 turn.
1-2 turn.
Yeah.
I figured higher. Is he going ahead of Neighbors?
Let's see. Thomas.
I don't want to be like anti Brian Thomas again this year, but
he's going after Neighbors, and we have it that way too.
I've seen that position quite a bit that people are saying Brian Thomas has to go ahead of Neighbors, and I'm like, man, this has been something as far as like edges and things to think about as we go into the offseason. That's something I've been hammering in my content for years, but people need to take a longer view and really still consider the college stuff after the rookie year. You just said it with Marvin Harrison. Neighbors was meaningfully better than Brian Thomas in the same offense for multiple seasons. Meaningfully better. Go back and look at all the numbers. Go back and look at the per route stuff, the volume earning, all of it. Neighbors had a worse quarterback this year. He's got continuity at the coaching position. They're going to get a quarterback upgrade.
Worse quarterbacks. Neighbors would have killed for Mac Jones. They would have been delighted to have Mac Jones.
Brian Thomas also late in the year was getting a ton of designed looks. I still think he's a superstar, but he was getting a ton of designed looks because every other player in that offense was injured. They lost Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, and Gabe Davis, and they were just throwing in wide receiver screens like nobody's business in the last month.
Yeah.
I still think, again, Brian Thomas is a star. it was situationally, there was really no comparison. And then he doesn't have a coach right now. We don't know if Trevor Lawrence is any good. Like, more importantly, the long view stuff on the player talent. Like, I feel pretty confident that Malik Neighbors is better than him because they were in the same offense and he was better than him.
I don't think anyone's gonna. Well, we'll see. But I mean, right now, I was looking at the ADP for Neighbors is 12 and Thomas is 14.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
People are going to get upset or get excited about the QB upgrade for Neighbors, and I think that'll keep
that'll help for sure. I was also looking at Hayden's ranks. Let me see where he's got it. I think he has Neighbors at 14 and Thomas at 13. Okay, so Hayden has him the other way. So maybe there will be an argument.
I've seen that on Twitter a few times. So anyway, I just want to. It's not. They're going to be close. It's not a huge deal. I guess my argument is long term, looking at their prospect profiles, their draft capital, all that stuff. Long term, if you told me one of these guys is one of the 5 best receivers in the NFL in 2 or 3 years, we're thinking about him like Jefferson and Chase and AJ Brown, I would bet a lot of money it's Neighbors over Thomas. I still think Thomas is going to be very, very good. I think he's more of like the 10th best receiver in the league than
me too. But I do think, like, if I was going to make the counter, which again, we have Neighbors ahead and I think Neighbors should be ahead, but which guy is like, when I turn up in week 17, I'm like feeling very confident that I'm like, sick. Brian Thomas is on my team. Like, I'm feeling good. Like, Lawrence is healthy. Everything's like normal. Lawrence is healthy. The Giants quarterback's healthy, right? But like, unfortunately, the Giants quarterback is Aiden O'Connell or something. It's like the corpse of Kirk Cousins, or like what is the upside is, I guess it's Darnold, but it could get week 17, especially for Neighbors, could get bad because Darnold could be bad. Daboll gets fired. Like, now we're back to DeVito in week 17. I could imagine feeling pretty awful about Neighbors in week 17 because of how uncertain that situation is, where Thomas is so locked in to at least Trevor Lawrence, which isn't ideal, but it's better than.
I mean, Giants have the 3rd overall pick. If they don't get anything done in the free agency period or anything else, if they don't land Darnold or anything, even if I know it's not a great quarterback class, but even if quarterbacks go 1-2, don't you think they're just going to take a quarterback at 3?
No, there isn't a guy. There's no quarterback at 3. If they go 1-2, there's 2 quarterbacks in the first round. Like, they would take Jackson Dart in the 2nd round, maybe, or Jalen Milroe in the 2nd round or something. But you don't.
Ward and Shadur are the only ones. I've been hearing that through the process, some other guys might bubble up like Dart.
So, like, I was listening to Nate Tice, and he was saying he has Cam Ward ranked like he had J.J. McCarthy, or graded, I should say, like he had J.J. McCarthy,
right?
Where you'd be comfortable to take him at 25, but then like half round inflation, you get to like the early teens, and then there's no quarterbacks in the class, so like maybe we just take him 1. But he isn't really there with Shador even. So the guy you're talking about, like, that you're just like, fuck it, we need a quarterback, let's take him, is kind of Shador for a lot of people. And he might be gone at 3. And then there's like not really a guy, I don't think. Maybe it's a long process. There could be. I think Jackson Dart has his fans. Milroe was like looking like an intriguing 1st round project type of bet at one point. It seems like that's cooled off. I think their best bet is the Titans or the Browns don't take a quarterback, because there's Abdul Carter's like a sick edge prospect, and obviously Travis Hunter. So those 2 guys, maybe like the Browns, just like, we're going to take our favorite of those guys, and then they take Shador at 3 or something like that.
So they have a decent amount of cap space, right?
I'm not sure.
They're like middle of the pack.
They?
I just looked it up over the cap. I guess what I was thinking is, even, I mean, I do know that the quarterback class is not expected to be great, and maybe they won't take one at 3. Maybe they'll have to trade out or something. I think Daboll knows that he kind of like needs to take a quarterback at this point, or else, like you just said, he's got fired. I think the overwhelming wisdom or like thought process is he's getting fired this year. But if you take a quarterback, you almost buy yourself another year. Like, I think they're like really likely to be like, we actually want to handpick our own quarterback. Let us do that. You kept us on to let us do that. We got settled with Daniel Jones. And so they're going to do almost anything in their power. They might trade up to get to
They
top
could trade
2 or
up.
top 1. Maybe give up a future first to do it because they're on their last year.
Who cares?
I mean, yeah, they don't give a shit. Like it's not our money. We're going to be gone anyway. But then also bring in a vet as a bridge. So like you mentioned JJ McCarthy. It could wind up being very similar to what the Vikings came into this year with, where they just replace Cousins with a Darnold McCarthy tandem. And if you do that, then I start thinking, okay, well, the quarterback play has a little bit of a higher floor when you give me 2 options. I mean, I made that case with the Raiders last year when you had both Minshew and O'Connell. And those guys are both bad options. But it did actually end up being a pretty decent passing environment. Bowers ends up having a great year.
Yeah.
Until Desmond Ridder had to play, and then it was horrible.
Yeah,
Desmond Ridder had to play.
But that's so frustrating. Like, I had a 5-5-5 with Bowers, and it was like, as long as Bowers has a good game, and then you're like, Desmond Ridder, you're like, I'm so fucked.
For sure. But I'm hoping the Giants will have 2 guys where the floor's like, a little bit there.
So, dude, in ranking the quarterbacks, it's so ugly. Like, I have Shador and Cam Ward in there. And then I'm out of quarterbacks by 30. Like, there's just not enough dudes. Like, I think, is Daniel Jones starting for a team this year?
That's why I think Darnold's gone from the Vikings. I think Daniel Jones and McCarthy is what the Vikings do. I think they just keep him. Minnesota. He chose to go there. Kevin O'Connell seems like a guy who likes to give guys other chances and like build them up. And they want to probably turn it over to McCarthy after Darnold completely collapsed late last year. I don't think Darnold's going to be back. Like Hayden, for example, I know has been talking about they're going to use some type of tag on him. I guess I'd be kind of surprised. The way that O'Connell talked about it after that loss, too, in the postseason, he had some really good, like I tweeted about it. I thought he's a great coach and just like a good like thinker. A lot of really good stuff about like perspective about like, look, we've been through a long journey this year and things that we can do better and things that Darnold can do better and all these things. When he was asked directly about it, he wasn't avoiding the question, but he also was talking in a way that was like, it certainly wasn't like that chapter is certainly over for us. But to me, it was like, I wish him the best, sort of was the vibe that I got, in a very mentor way. But I don't know. I just never really heard a coach handle something as well as I thought he handled that. But the vibe that I got, I could be wrong, was that he was basically like, yeah, I mean, we're going to move on from it. Like,
so I'm assuming that
McCarthy.
I'm assuming that Darnold is elsewhere. I'm assuming that Fields or Russ, let's say, but I think it's probably Fields, takes the Steelers job. And I'm assuming that, like some of the, like Justin Fields is still, Geno Smith and Derek Carr and like kind of like some of the starters we're like less excited about are all still in place.
But what about Geno? You were saying, what if he's gone?
What I'm saying for this is that I'm assuming he's there.
Sure.
I'm still, and I'm assuming Shador starts week 1 and Cam starts week 1. I'm the quarterback short, right? So here's the guys. Someone's starting from this group, I get, like, or maybe another name, but Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, Will Levis, but it won't be him. Gardner Minshew, Aaron Jones, Deshaun Watson obviously won't be. Russell Wilson. You think it's Cousins?
You said Aaron Jones. Did you mean Aaron Rodgers?
Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah. So, I mean, between Rodgers and Cousins, a team at the Giants,
I think retires. I think Rodgers is going to retire.
Maybe he retires. But I think it's possible he continues to play because he wants to go out on his own terms. Cousins, I think, starts somewhere.
Yeah. I think that's what it is, probably. It's Cousins.
He's going to get cut or whatever, but wherever he goes, he's going to go where he thinks he can start. It could be the Giants. I mean, I'll take Kirk Cousins throwing him in league neighbors. Fuck it.
Yeah.
It won't be great, but it'd be better than what he got last year.
It's something. I'd like Cousins to the Browns because then the Browns can take Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter and like get a blue chip defensive guy, which I think Hunter, that's another one of the big questions of the offseason is what position does Hunter play? It seems like cornerback.
What are you putting him at? Because I think I heard Underdog's just going to put him as a wide receiver and let people take the risk.
Oh, he should be. He should. Yeah. If they don't list him at wide receiver, I'll be annoyed. I want him in the pool.
Yeah, he'll be in the pool.
I think he should be. We have him at like 130. That's where we have him.
Do we call that Jalen Polk range?
Jalen Polk range, where like he could literally be a 0 all year. But
So
maybe there's a chance he plays receiver.
You could draft
Just
Travis
like
Hunter to
Jalen
set
Polk.
up Kirk Cousins if we're going to extend that analogy.
Yeah.
I feel like he's going to be a top 5 pick, and even if he is a corner, he's not going to be a 0. They're still going to put him on offense.
He won't be a 0.
little
He
bit.
won't be a 0.
Yeah. He'll have some trick plays and some shit that maybe it'll work out.
The issue is the ceiling, though. Like, you're like, at what point is it okay to not really have a ceiling?
For sure.
You know? Like,
you're like, best case scenario is like discount Jamison Williams, or he's just like racking up explosive plays on pretty limited volume.
Right. It's like, where does like one spike week get me to where I'm like, man, okay, that's fine. And it's not like the 9th.
Like discount Marvin Mims even.
Yeah.
A few manufactured touches, a few bombs.
Yeah.
Man.
But I mean, I don't know where he goes. I think we're probably fading him, but I would kind of love if he's announced as a corner. But honestly, like if he's a receiver, then I'd be really in.
I think he plays both ways at the NFL level for a period of time. I honestly
like would be so fun. Players, that would be so fun.
Like they're gonna draft him really high. He did it in college. He's not gonna like when they start interviewing him at the combine and stuff. He's gonna be like, I'm playing both ways. Like, stop asking me that question. You know, like when Lamar, people are like, "Are you gonna work out at receiver?" He's like, "I'm a quarterback. Stop asking me this stupid question." Like, this is just speculation about him because people think he's a better corner. I think he's gonna be like, "You want to draft me? I want to play on both sides of the ball." That'd be my guess.
Man, I think I'd get mostly on board if he was adamant that he's playing both ways and the team, and that started to be noises that the team drafting him would be open to that. Then I think man, you'd talk about him maybe in the 70s, something like that. Because now you actually do have a bit of a ceiling. It's risky. It's still like it's a lot riskier than Tet because he might not play offense. But
this dude went and played for Dion, the last best guy that played a little bit on both sides of the ball. Dion actually played some legit receiver for Dallas for a season. Followed him to Colorado. Desperately wanted to be great. Desperately wanted to win the Heisman. There was talk about that. There was like a whole campaign. Players don't want to just like limit their ceiling and go, "I'm going to go play defense my whole career." This guy wants to be known as the greatest player of all time. Like individually, he wants to be elite at everything. I think he's going to play receiver. And
we need FFPC, to Josh's question, to weigh in on what they'll do, because they're the site that goes with the official depth chart, even if the best ball contest has been open. So what is it? Amazing. If he's quarterback, what happens? Tell us now.
Amazing.
That would be incredible.
We need to know.
All right. Well, we're gonna have a long off season to discuss all such matters, but it was good to sync back up. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, we are going to be rolling regularly in the afternoons on Thursday, which is what we did last year in the off season. Works much better with all of our schedules. We'll also have ADP chasing. You guys will keep your Monday time. Although there was something in your group chat, Pat, that you guys were going to maybe try to get together for an episode later this week, or I guess that would be tomorrow.
Yeah, I need to figure that out.
So maybe that'll happen. You know, we had the Mike Shope, Davis Maddock, Bills versus Chiefs angle, in case you didn't get enough of the Davis Maddock versus Liam angle there. And
Mike was
way under the radar.
Monday.
The Davis Maddock versus Leone angle. I mean, there's Davis against the world.
That's true. Oh man. We had Mike was busy, but he's lucky the Bills won, you know, because it's a different vibe if we cancel the show after Bills win than after Bills loss, you know.
It's true. All right. Appreciate you guys. If you want to hop in the Discord, you can become a YouTube member, hop in there. Otherwise, you guys should see ADP chasing, and then we will be back next Thursday at this 3 p.m. Eastern time. All right. For Gretch, for Pat, I'm Pete. We'll see you guys next time on Ship Chasing.